In the winter of 1659, in the heart of Puritan Boston, joy became a crime. Not because of war, not because of poverty, but because Christmas to the Puritans was a lie dressed in carols. They knew the Bible never named December 25th as Christ's birthday. They saw Christmas as a Roman invention, pagan feasts wrapped in Christian robes. And in their new world, they would allow no corruption of truth. So on June 3rd, 1659, the General Court of Massachusetts Bay passed a law no other colony dared. Whosoever shall be found observing the 25th day of December as a festival shall pay 5 shillings. 5 shillings was not a slap on the wrist. It was ruin for a laborer. It was the price of a sheep, a barrel of flour, a week's survival, and the punishment applied to every one man, woman, even child. Sing a carol? Fine. Share a feast? Fine. Say Merry Christmas? Fine. The law made no exceptions for faith, family, or tradition. For the Puritans, purity mattered more than peace, and Boston became the only place in the English world where Christmas was illegal. While London burned with feasts, Boston burned with silence. The first Christmas under the law came in 1659. No bells rang, no fires roared, no children laughed. Only the wind carried sound through the streets. But someone broke the silence. On Christmas morning, 1659, constables found a group gathered in a home on Milk Street. They were not feasting, not singing, just sharing bread and quiet prayer. Still, they were fined. Every one of them. The message was clear. Unity was dangerous. Joy was rebellion. And Boston's Christmas silence would last longer than anyone imagined. Not for a year, not for a decade, but for over 2 centuries. While the world celebrated, Boston worked, and the law's shadow never lifted. December 25th meant nothing in Boston. Not a holiday, not a rest, just another day of labor. Children walked to school through snow, their breath visible, their faces blank, their minds on arithmetic, not angels. Shops opened at sunrise, selling flour and wool, never holly or gifts or anything resembling celebration. Families ate the same meal they always did: stew, bread, silence, and no mention of the season. No carols echoed in streets, no bells rang, no trees stood in parlors. Only work filled the winter air. Even in churches, pastors avoided the date, preaching on discipline instead of divine birth or holy night. Travelers from New York brought stories of feasts and songs, but Bostonians listened and turned back to work. The law faded in 1681, but the culture never changed. Silence became tradition, not obedience to statute. Generations grew up never knowing Christmas, joy only as a word whispered with caution or shame. In 1720, a sailor lit a pine branch. Neighbors reported him before the flame reached the second knot. Schools stayed open through the 1700s, teaching Latin on Christmas, while Southern children played with handmade toys. Factories ran double shifts in December, not for holiday demand, but because no day deserved special treatment. Visitors wrote letters home, shocked by Boston's coldness. They treat Christ's birthday like a common Tuesday. One woman in 1765 hung a red cloth by noon. The town council ordered it burned in public square. No punishment was needed. Self-policing ran deeper than law, embedded in every neighbor's watchful, silent eye. Even during the Revolution, when freedom was fought for, Christmas remained shackled by cultural habit, not British rule. In 1800, a German immigrant placed a small tree. His landlord evicted him before sunset for moral disturbance. Newspapers never mentioned the date except to note shipping schedules or crop prices like any winter day. Children asked why no gifts came, and parents answered simply, because celebration is vanity, and vanity is sin. The silence wasn't enforcement, it was identity, woven into Boston's soul like thread in Puritan wool. By 1820, the rest of America embraced Santa. But Boston shops sold only candles for light, never for cheer. Churches rejected Christ's Mass as Catholic corruption, preferring sermons on thrift, duty, and the wages of idleness. Families who secretly celebrated spoke in whispers, hid small tokens, and never let joy cross their thresholds aloud. Yet no law forbade it after 1681. Only fear of judgment, exclusion, and the weight of inherited disapproval. In 1836, Alabama declared Christmas a holiday. Massachusetts watched, silent, and kept its schools and markets open. Immigrants brought carols in their hearts, but sang them only behind closed doors, never on public streets. The city's soul remained frozen in 1659, long after the law had vanished from the books. Joy was not banned by statute. It was exiled by habit, custom, and 200 years of practiced denial. Even when legal, Christmas felt foreign. In Boston, a Southern custom, a Catholic relic, an un-American indulgence. And so, the silence deepened, not from fear of fine, but from generations trained to see joy as weakness. In 1840, a store displayed Holly by evening. It was torn down by anonymous hands in the dark. No arrests, no trials, just quiet correction, as if the city itself rejected the very idea of festivity. Children learned early. December 25th was for chores, not carols, for work, not wonder, for silence, not song. The world changed around Boston, but Boston refused to let Christmas cross its cultural threshold for 2 centuries. This was not obedience, it was identity, hardened by time, polished by pride, and sealed in collective memory as virtue. And in that silence, Boston believed it was righteous, while the rest of America slowly wrapped itself in joy. But change was coming, not from law, but from people who refused to let 200 years define forever. In 1850, the state finally made Christmas legal, but Boston's heart remained closed long after the law changed. Schools stayed open, shops sold no gifts, streets echoed with business, not bells, well into the industrial age. The ban was gone, but the silence remained deep, cultural, and more powerful than any law ever written. Not everyone obeyed the silence. Some resisted not with protest, but with quiet, stubborn acts of human warmth. In 1823, a seamstress stitched red thread into children's coats, calling it winter trim, never Christmas color. German families hummed old carols while washing dishes, turning melody into rhythm, so neighbors heard only labor. Irish dock workers shared extra stew on December 25th, calling it Cold Day Charity, never Christmas dinner. A school teacher in 1841 gave students 1 extra hour of free time, never naming the date behind her kindness. No banners were raised, no speeches made. Resistance lived in gestures too small for the law to punish. Immigrant mothers baked sweet bread on the 24th, claiming it was for winter strength, not for celebration. Children exchanged handmade tokens, wooden stars, carved birds, calling them friendship gifts, never Christmas presents. A shopkeeper in 1850 left his door open an hour late, so tired workers could warm their hands. These were not rebellions, just humanity refusing to let 2 centuries erase its need for connection and light. In 1854, a newspaper editor printed a poem about winter kindness. Readers knew it was about Christmas, unnamed. Churches began holding December reflections, sermons that spoke of peace, hope, and light, avoiding the sacred date. A factory owner gave workers half a day off in 1855, citing seasonal fatigue, not Christmas spirit. These small cracks in the silence grew, not from law, but from people who remembered joy was human. By 1856, public opinion shifted, not because of religion, but because loneliness finally outweighed tradition's cold grip. When the state declared Christmas a holiday, it was not leadership, it was catching up to quiet resistance. Yet Boston's elite still scoffed, calling Christmas sentimental nonsense, unfit for a city of reason and industry. Working families celebrated in whispers, in kitchens, in alleys, keeping joy alive where authority could not reach it. No tree stood in public squares, but pine boughs appeared on doorsteps, removed by morning, replaced the next night. This was resistance without flags, just ordinary people reclaiming a piece of joy their ancestors had outlawed but never erased. In 1860, a church held its first December Eve service, still avoiding the word Christmas, but singing Silent Night. The song spread through neighborhoods, never loud, never public, but sung behind curtains where joy could breathe safely. Children began asking why other cities celebrated, and parents, for the first time, had no answer rooted in certainty. The old silence was not broken by law, it was softened by generations who chose kindness over dogma. By the 1870s, schools closed quietly on December 25th. No announcement, just locked doors and empty desks. Shops began selling colored ribbons in December, never calling them gift wrap, just winter decoration for parcels. The resistance won not with noise, but with persistence, small acts repeated until they became the new normal. Boston never held a parade for Christmas, but it finally stopped punishing those who quietly welcomed its spirit. After 200 years, the silence did not shatter. It simply made room for a whisper of carols. The law changed in 1856, but Boston's heart resisted tradition, clung tighter than any statute ever could. Schools remained open, shops stayed busy, streets echoed with commerce, not carols, well into the 1860s. A newspaper in 1867 called Christmas a useful pause for labor, still avoiding words like joy or holy. Yet change crept in, not through law, but through children who saw Christmas in storybooks from New York. In 1870, a teacher allowed students to draw winter scenes. Many drew trees with stars, unnamed but unmistakable. No one corrected them. No one punished them. The silence was finally losing its power to frighten. By 1875, a few shops displayed red cloth in December, not as decoration, but as seasonal fabric for sale. Customers bought it quietly, took it home, and made ribbons their children wore on the 25th. The city council debated banning festive displays in 1878, but public opinion had shifted beyond their control. A vote was called. It failed, not because of law, but because Boston was finally tired of silence. In 1880, a church held its first public Christmas Eve service, and more than 200 attended without shame. No carols were sung outside, but inside voices rose softly at first, then with growing confidence and warmth. The next morning, no fines were issued, no arrests made. Joy had crossed the threshold unchallenged. By 1885, schools closed officially on December 25th, calling it winter recess, but everyone knew the truth. Children stayed home, built snowmen, and exchanged small gifts wrapped in plain paper tied with red string. The elite still disapproved, but their voices grew quieter as families embraced what 2 centuries had denied them. In 1890, a store sold small evergreen boughs labeled for winter freshness, never for Christmas decoration. Buyers carried them home openly, placed them on tables, and lit no candles, just let pine scent fill rooms. The turning point was not a law or speech. It was 1,000 small acts of ordinary courage. Boston did not surrender to Christmas. It slowly remembered that joy was not sin, but humanity. In 1895, the first public Christmas tree appeared, not in a square, but in a private club garden. It had no ornaments, no candles, just green branches against winter sky, a quiet declaration of change. Newspapers reported it without mockery, calling it a harmless custom, gaining quiet acceptance among certain circles. The old guard faded. New generations saw no sin in celebration-only connection, warmth, and shared December light. By 1900, Boston finally celebrated not with fanfare, but with the soft certainty of a long-denied truth. Christmas was no longer illegal, no longer shameful, just human, simple, and finally, peacefully, part of Boston life. The turning point was not an event. It was the moment Boston stopped fearing joy and started living it. After 200 years, the law was gone, the culture had bent, and silence gave way to song. Not loud, not public, but real, and enough to heal 2 centuries of practiced denial and cold tradition. The turning point was quiet, because in Boston, even revolution wore the cloak of ordinary December daylight. By 1910, Boston celebrated Christmas like any American city with trees, carols, and children's laughter in snowy streets. But no one spoke of the 200 years of silence vanished, as if it never existed. School books mention Puritans, but never their war on Christmas, as if shame buried the truth with time. The law was repealed, the culture changed, but the memory was erased, not by force, but by choice. Boston preferred to forget it ever banned joy, because admitting it meant facing 2 centuries of collective denial. No monument was built, no plaque installed. The story lived only in forgotten court records and silence. Generations grew up believing Christmas was always welcome in America, even in its most pious colonies. The truth became a ghost known to archivists, ignored by the public, lost to the noise of modern celebration. In 1930, a historian published the story, but newspapers called it a curious footnote not worth revisiting. Boston had moved on. Joy was no longer rebellion. It was routine, expected, and utterly ordinary in December air. The forgetting was not accidental. It was necessary to heal a city that once punished kindness as treason. To remember meant to ask, how could a society outlaw joy and call it righteousness for 200 years? So Boston chose peace over truth celebration, over reckoning, and wrapped its past in the same silence it once enforced. Today, tourists visit Boston for history, but no guide mentions the Christmas ban as if it never happened. The law is real. The fines are real. The silence was real, but the memory is almost gone. And that is the final irony. A city that once punished joy now forgets it ever denied it. We celebrate freely today because others resisted quietly yesterday, but we rarely honor the silence they broke. This story is not about religion. It is about how fear can outlaw humanity and habit can hide truth, and how easily a society forgets its own sins when the season demands cheer, not reflection. But the truth remains in archives, in laws, in the quiet courage of those who defied silence. America's Christmas ban was real. It lasted 200 years, and almost no one remembers why. Not because it didn't happen, but because remembering would mean admitting joy was once a crime in our soil. So we sing carols louder, wrap gifts brighter, and forget the day Boston made kindness illegal in December. But history does not disappear. It waits in silence, hoping someone will finally ask, "What did we bury?" This is not just Boston's story. It is a warning about how easily we trade joy for control, and how quickly we forget the cost of silence until someone dares to whisper carols in the snow. The ban is gone, the silence is broken, but the lesson remains if we choose to remember it. Because joy is never trivial, it is resistance, connection, humanity, and worth protecting even when the world calls it sin. America banned Christmas for 200 years, and no one remembers why.